Chris Robertshaw is joining me here in the studio. It's a reference to the interview I did with Ray Harmer to do with the deep port, the deep harbour, the future of bringing in the big cruise lines and the £8 million that it's to start with. I mean, and by the way, you're not the only one that's going to tell me that these numbers don't seem to stack up. But
they're not the right numbers either. Right. Ray Harmer's giving you the wrong numbers.
Go on then. So, what is the right number then? And what we're talking about here?
Let's start right from the beginning. What is really pleasing is the fact that DOI, the government effectively, is coming out and recognising that there's a fundamental problem with our major port, Douglas Harbour. Effectively, they are at last, and it's taken some time for them to come out and say this, that our current facilities are not fit for future purpose. Effectively, as everything around us in terms of working boats, ferries, cruise ships that all get bigger, the Douglas Harbour becomes ever more inadequate for future purpose. So effectively, right now, we're on the verge of progressively dying as a harbour because it's just too small.
And it's silting up all the time, though.
To some extent, that's true. But the fundamental question then is, can we make good our current harbour for all these various purposes? Or should we start again with a deep water harbour a little bit further out?
Oh, that's quite radical. What, you mean forget what we got there and...
Not forget what we've got there.
No,
Think if we went out further out, think just what we can do with what we've got, because there are all sorts of added value opportunities which DOI have and the government have not even begun to consider. But let's not go there for a second. The impression I got from Ray, and it's pretty clear because I've listened to his interview twice now, was that he was suggesting, waving his arms vaguely, that somehow a 450 metre deep water berth, concrete block with dolphins, would cost £80 million. Not correct. That's the net present value over the life of it. The actual cost is around about £45 million. He then referred to £11 million for making Victoria Pier a partial deep water berth for cruise ships at £11 million. And he left the taxpayer to think about that comparison. I'm really disappointed in Ray for using those sort of numbers because they're not correct. A few days ago, DOI and Department for Enterprise presented all the members of Tynwald with effectively two major reports. One was their harbour strategy, and the other one was the Deloitte assessment of, for example, the cruise ship element of all of this. What Ray didn't tell you was that if you read the Deloitte report, the actual payback time on a deep water harbour is 28 years. On the one he's proposing is 48 years. So effectively, you could reasonably argue that Deloitte was leaning towards a deep harbour facility, a fit for future purpose harbour. And what Ray didn't tell you as well was that if you try to dig a deep hole by Victoria Pier for cruise ships, it's right next to a beach. Now, let me take you back. You and I, many, many, many years ago, will have been kids on the beach with a spade and a bucket. You remember that if you dig a hole in a beach and the tide comes in, it fills. Let me make this point. It fills in. So effectively, there would be, and I'm pretty clear about this, there would be a need for a dredger. My understanding on dredging is that to keep the harbour at the correct depth could cost around about £1.5 million a year to dredge the harbour to keep it to the right depth. Over the lifetime of the investment you're talking about, let's just take a 40-year cycle. We're talking about a cost greater just to keep the harbour dredged than to build the cost of a deep water facility. The government the people of the Isle of Man are simply not being respected. The taxpayer is not being respected here, and furthermore, Tynwald is not being respected because we were given effectively 10 days to consume an awful lot of data and speed reading it, which I've done so far, and listening to Ray. What the government is saying is at odds with the information that we've got, and furthermore, it's not fully adequate because they've only concentrated on how we can make the inner harbour fit for future purpose, and they've not compared it to what they might do by having a deep water berth.
I'll let you have your say now. Come on.
Yeah.
Are you saying seriously that Ray Harmer is misleading the public and misleading members of Tynwald, which is a huge Misleading. I mean, is that the
word?
Well,
that his interview misled. Now, whether he did it intentionally or not, I don't know. But is it right and proper for two departments of government, Department for Enterprise and Department of Infrastructure, to sort of try to bounce Tynwald through a very complex process where we're actually talking about the next 100 years of life of our harbour, squash it into a sort of a 10-day period?
You'll send it to a committee, won't you? I mean, that's what you'll be recommending, no doubt. Sure.
Well, immediately we heard about this. The Environment and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee wanted immediately to look at this. In fact, the answer we got from the question we got from the director of the chief executive of the Department of Infrastructure was, well, should you people be looking at this before it goes to Tynwald? Surely you're only allowed to look at it after we've got this through Tynwald. Disgraceful, Paul. Absolutely disgraceful. We're talking about the future of our harbour, of our arterial routes, profound things. You know, this business about, we need to do the harbour up. This business about there's maintenance to do. It's not, Paul. It's about having to make the facilities on the inside of Alexander Pier, each side of the Edward Pier and the Victoria Pier, deeper. Now, effectively, not only is the outer side of the Victoria Pier going to be susceptible to being filled in with sand, but every time you get storm conditions, you could get silt washing down the river. You know, it's verging on irresponsible not to look thoroughly at the other options. And then
I was going to ask you, do you have a plan B yourself? I mean, do you see where the future would be rather than what they're sort of going for?
Is it the duty and responsibility of one member to come up with the alternative plan when in fact what you're saying is to DOI that you should be looking at these options and presenting them to the members of Tynwald in a rational, clear way and then inform the public properly? They're not doing that.
There was a private enterprise scheme put forward, I think it was last June, wasn't it, when there was a potential proposal for private money to do something.
That was, as I recall, that was the shipping associations trying to encourage the idea of a deep water berth. But what they were quietly saying, that was a lead edge to what the DOI have now accepted. And they won't say it, but the current harbour is no longer fit for future purpose because it's too shallow and too
start
constrained.
Again, you're saying?
We have to, Tynwald members representing the taxpayer, when we're considering something that's going to last for years and years and years, are duty bound to consider two options, and we have not been given those two options. It's a very limited mindset that sits inside government. It's not the first time this has happened. What happens is operational officers contrive in their own minds what they think is right. They then seek consultation submissions limited by their advice, and so consequently the consultation document that they've got in terms of what the options are limited them to looking at the reconstruction of the inner harbour, not what we could do with a new harbour.
Okay, well, first of all, Coleman presumably have already process this one, so that they must be backing Harmer on this, and therefore, it goes to that'll be a mighty vote there, obviously.
Well, if Department for Enterprise are backing this, then what on earth do they think they're doing? What right have they got to say that the Isle of Man can't cope with a progressive increase in tourism over a number of years? Let's look at that for a second. We heard Ray Harmer talking about, can we cope with these numbers? First of all, he got his numbers wrong. He was talking to you about 3,500. I don't think he actually understands that only 60% of, normally speaking, on average, of cruise ship visitors come off the boat in the first instance. If he properly correlated the number of people that can be got on a cruise ship that would fit in the limited facility up to 250 metres that he's talking about, you would never get 3,500 off at one time. He's trying to frighten people. It would be much more manageable. Now, let's talk about from the taxpayer's point of view. Right now, the taxpayer is subventing or supporting with their money the horse tram, the electric tram, the steam trains, the bus system, the Isle of Man heritage sites, all of which the taxpayers paying towards. What they desperately need is a greater influx of visitors to significantly reduce that subsidy by the taxpayer.
Which this will be doing.
And our esteemed leaders in Department for Enterprise are saying, oh, we can't cope with that. So what are they doing? Turning around to the tax public and say, look, we can't cope with an increase in business. Let's just simply have you, the taxpayer, carrying on funding these. Quite honestly, Paul, downright disgraceful.
Using some harsh, strong words here.
I think it's about...
Do you think you have been misled? Back to that. Do you honestly think you're being misled? The public are being misled?
We're being led up, the general public and Tynwald are on the verge of being led up the garden path by an inadequate appraisal, a proper balanced approach, and an honest presentation of the facts. Disgraceful.
Do you think a natural deep water, I think it's Port St Mary is about the only place in the Isle of Man that's coming up with the numbers for a deep water berth?
You can, that we're talking about where is the right place for the fit for future purpose over the next 100 years, deep water harbour, whether it's fuel delivery, whether it's bulk concrete, whether it's ferries, whether it's working boats outside the Isle of Man, whether it's cruise ships. Our harbour is, in the end, inadequate unless we spend a fortune. That fortune is £80 million. That's what we're talking about, not this 11 million that Ray's talking about. One way or the other, there's a lot of money to be spent, one way or the other. We, Tynwald members, the taxpayer, needs to know is the right thing to do to spend it on the existing not fit for purpose facility, or whether it's the right thing to do to start again.
So this is the white elephant. This whole
What
thing.
is?
This project is just not fit for purpose in your view.
My argument is that we're not being treated responsibly. We're not being given the opportunity to look at the options.
Have you got support
over a period of time?
Have you had other MHKs onto you? Or are you going to be a lone wolf?
All the other members will have only had the same amount of time as me to look at it. But you look at my background, it's a commercial background. So with respect, I'm going to have an opportunity to analyse some of these things pretty quickly. I've got a background in tourism. That's my constituency. So I'm going to be quicker off the mark, shall we say, than...
Fine. Well, I said I've had a fair few briefings from people, which I usually get, about saying these things didn't quite appear as rosy as it probably appeared in that interview. But you're going on the record to call it out.
Yes, I am.
What will you do in Tynwald? What will you be seeking?
I will not vote for that strategy as it stands at the moment, because it's thoroughly inadequate.
So go to a committee of some sort?
No, I don't think we necessarily need to do that. I think all we need to do is accept the work they've done so far, which is honest in the sense that it says, look, that harbour there is not fit for purpose. We agree that. Number two, I accept the fact that there's a lot of money to be spent. So let's accept the report for what it's worth at the moment.
But you agree we want more visitors. You think that at the end of the day, the reasoning behind this is to try and tap into this wealth of people that can potentially be coming to the Isle of Man and spending money.
How miserably far behind we have now sunk in comparison to everybody else. There's more than 100,000 going into Dublin and more than 100,000 going into Belfast. There's over 100,000 going into Orkney. Guernsey's doing well. Liverpool's investing in it, and what we're doing, running around pathetically, scratching around with a few thousand, because we haven't got the vision, the courage and the determination to do the job properly, which is get a proper analysis of what we need to do with our harbour to make it fit for purpose for all the possible opportunities that lie ahead.
Okay, this is going to run and run, isn't it? This is not going to go simply through a vote. I can see this now.
Well, I hope it does run and run, because if Tynwald allow the wool to be pulled over their eyes by a Department of Infrastructure with a document that's been presented to them thus far, then I'm speechless. Speechless.